It was a dark and stormy winter's morning. Very common theme in Londonderry. We don't get snow in these parts, unfortunately. It was mid-January, and I, alongside 121 other people my age, were going into my old school to take an English exam. Truly terrifying stuff. Actually, no, not really. English language was definitely my best of the core subjects, and English literature, I have to say, was the subject that I did the most revision for, and thus I was the most confident in. Though that may or may not have been because a certain smash hit visual novel released slightly prior to the exam, but I digress. If you guys have watched my vlogs or listened to my commentary and gameplay videos, you'll know that I have a bit of a dramatic side. Anytime we were in English class and drama, acting, or storytelling was the subject, I was in my element. I had to play two parts simultaneously in multiple group projects, and one of the other groups needed time to set up their scene, so they brought me on to sing Country Road as an intermission theme. I mean, I got full marks, I can't complain. So yes, backstory over. The English exam starts in half an hour, and we all start to file into what was once our bright, bustling building, now old, decaying, withered, and run down. Cracks along the walls, cobwebs infesting the ceilings, and crevices between the doors, lights flickering due to a month or so of neglect and abandonment, and a cold winter air blowing through the halls, indicating that nature had claimed this territory. Many people whipped their booklets out and started to look over their literary techniques. Some people sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, terrified of the impending examination. A few people looked up and down the halls, noting how different the place looked and felt. So what did I do? Well, as I previously stated, I was confident for the exam. English language is literally just storytelling and using your language to convey emotion, so there really isn't anything you can do to revise for it in a traditional sense. Literature, on the other hand, I had revised. I made the most of my poetry lessons every week, striking a fine balance between jotting down notes, annotating poems, and asking questions to the teacher, and messing around with the lads at my table anytime the teacher stepped out of the classroom, and chatting and gossiping with the new girl who sat to my left. Clearly, I was prepared for this exam. So with that in mind, I decided to explore the building. I'm an adventurous spirit. I love exploring, so naturally, a building that had just been abandoned was right up my street, though not literally. I got my phone out, and I hit the record button. I wanted to show my friends my findings afterwards, and so I filmed myself wandering the empty halls. My initial plan was to go to the canteen area, seeing as that was the closest area to where I was. I pushed the doorway. I pushed it again. Locked. I turned around and I took a different path. It struck me as odd that the canteen area of all places would be barred off, but I shrugged it off. I'll just explore elsewhere, I said to myself. I was all alone, with the only sound being the distant ambience of people talking in the main hall just outside of the examination room. I decided to check out my old form room, the room where my classmates and I would meet up early in the mornings of every day before our lessons. I twisted the doorknob. It was open, which shocked me, as every other room I had encountered up to that point had been locked. Something about it didn't quite seem right, but I entered anyway. I didn't think much of it. I was met with the view of an empty room, save for a couple of chairs strewn around the entire classroom, and a cabinet door that had seemingly fallen off its hinges. A room that was once so full of life and chat and adventure had been reduced to a room of somberness and silence. It even seemed to have been vandalized since we were gone. The cabinet, which granted I broke initially, was fixed up shortly after, was left lying on the floor, and the windows, while never exactly spotless, had stains and cracks all over. Something was amiss. As I took a step forward, the ambience stopped. Dead silence rushed to my ears. There wasn't a single other sound than my footsteps and my voice, pointing out just how bizarre this place was. Even more intriguing was that the chairs were still arranged in their original positions, as if the tables had still existed. And yet, one of the chairs, specifically the one at the corner of my table, was missing. Again, I thought very little of it. But little did I know, things were about to get much, much more intense. I ventured my way up to the top floor. More and more people started to explore the place, but nobody else had ascended to the area I was in, at least not that I could tell. I approached the double door in the hallway. It was locked, but after a bit of jerking, I managed to force my way through after hearing a jolting sound. Did I just break the lock? Had this place really been this unkempt since I was gone? Those were the questions that rushed through my head as I ventured further down the corridor, stopping at one of the elevator rooms when I realized one major red flag. The lights were on, and they were working. Now, I never did engineering or technology outside of the junior certificate, but I'm pretty sure that lights cannot stay on for over a month without being switched off. This must mean that somebody had to have been here recently. Which is impossible, because the door was locked. Right? It was at this moment where it became even weirder. Opening the storage closet, out of blind curiosity and desperation for answers, I found a pair of shoes in relatively good condition. Call me a Formula One driver, because by this point, my mind was racing. Lights on? A pair of fresh shoes? What is going on? I thought to myself. I turned the corner, my movements stilted. My mind was so fried with all of these bizarre findings that I couldn't focus. And that's when I heard somebody let out a scream from below, followed by another. The chatter from the people in my year stopped abruptly. Silence. Dead. Ringing. Silence. I was shook. I didn't know what to think. I briefly put together a theory in my mind that these eerie sightings, followed by screams of, potentially, my peers, meant that there was, perhaps, a killer was on the loose. I shook the thought out of my mind. I knew something that absurd couldn't happen, but it was a thought. Despite the rare occurrence of me showing visible fear, something inside me told me to venture on. I didn't want to, but I felt like I had no choice. I was a victim to my own impulse, my instincts overwritten by my desire to put the pieces together. I trekked down the languages corridor, knowing that there was something I had to follow. Up until the screaming, I had provided commentary as I recorded my journey, but at this point, I was mute. No words came to my mind. Nothing I said would describe how I was feeling. It was like being in the passenger seat of my own body. I couldn't fight off the urge to go. My body just took me. At this point, I started seeing some strange visions. I couldn't quite put my finger on them, but some of the things I saw weren't too pleasant. At the time, I was about a third of the way through Season 2 of The Adventures of 10 Craft, which, for all intents and purposes, was a series about my classmates and myself trying to survive in popular video game Minecraft. What I was hallucinating, however, felt as if it were happening, but for real. I could see all of us getting killed off right before my very eyes, only to see one of the characters, my character, still standing in complete and utter darkness. What felt like an eternity passed before I finally returned to Earth, but given the location I just witnessed, I felt like there was only one place in this school where my body was headed. After minutes of mindlessly wandering, I finally reached where I needed to be. A large door just outside of the mathematics corridor. Normally this door was all boarded up, preventing students from entering. However, as a result of transferring items from this school to the new establishment, coupled with the fact that this school had plans to renovate this place eventually, it made sense as to why it was left open. I entered the doorway, pushing the door open slowly. The creaking sound emitting from the hinges were more than enough to send shivers down my spine. But I persevered. Wide open, the door revealed a thin corridor, giving birth to a staircase going down into absolute darkness. My immediate guess was that it was a basement of some kind. Despite what my video game obsessed lifestyle and lack of social interactions would suggest, I'd never actually been in a basement before. And as creepy as it was, it intrigued me. It was like descending into the metaphorical depths of hell. My classmates would always slag me off for keeping a Bible in my blazer pocket, but given the previous analogy, I held on to it as I took the plunge. To say it was dark would be putting it lightly. That it was so dark, I had to end my recording session, for there would be nothing to see. I enabled the torch function on my phone and pointed it along the walls, searching for a light switch of some kind. I stumbled about in the darkness for a few minutes before I finally came across a power generator. Beside it, there was a series of switches. I flicked one, and the lights would quickly turn on. Since there was no reason to keep this place in viable condition, it didn't surprise me too much that the lights were faulty. But it was chilling, nonetheless. Before anything else happened, I took the opportunity to reflect over the past half hour. And with the English exam starting in a few minutes, I slowly reflect on how I got here and what I saw. The canteen area, barred up and out of bounds. My old form room in disrepair, quite possibly vandalised. The elevator shaft had an empty pair of shoes. Screaming heard throughout the building, followed by silence. And my vision of everybody else dying around me. I racked my brain. I tried to put the pieces together. It didn't make sense to me. It wouldn't make sense to me. It couldn't make sense to me. Or could it? The light flickered one final time, and with the final flicker, in the corner of my eye, I thought I could make something out. The darkness had returned. I felt a searing pain go right through my chest. The lights came back on. Wincing, I looked forward. I looked down. No scratches, No bruises. Must have been reactive shock. I looked right in front of me. It was... No way. It couldn't be. It was like looking through a mirror. It was like an out-of-body experience. It was like finding your long-lost twin. My mind was destroyed at this point. My brain could not comprehend what was happening. Two Ross Duncans in the same place at the same time. I saw a brief glint down near his hand area, and I stared at it, trying to make out what he was holding. He jerked it up to me, and I dropped. A look-alike with a knife, I thought to myself. My instincts told me I was in immediate danger, but my brain, as it had done so the entire time, told me otherwise. This was too suspicious. After a few moments, the doppelganger dropped the knife and held his hand out. My body, acting by itself again, took it, and I reluctantly stepped forward. The lights, not being able to hold out any longer, switched off. I saw the knife on the ground. I picked it up. At this point, I couldn't feel my own body any longer. I looked down at my hand. I looked down at the doppelganger's hand. They were one and the same. Until this point, I couldn't comprehend anything that I was finding. Now I understood everything, clear as crystal. The boarded-off canteen. The cafeteria workers had found out that there was no more cutlery, and so that there was no reason to keep it open. My knife was the final piece. The unlocked, empty, vandalized classroom. My first striking location. An empty void to symbolize the fact that there's nobody left. The lost shoes, the downstairs screaming, the accompanying silence. Murder. The hallucinations. My consciousness's way of telling me that the deed has been done. Me wandering around the school? I was an adventurous spirit. Literally. And I had reunited with my body, with the glee of what I had just accomplished. My final body count? 121.